Welcome, one and all, to another magnificent stream. We have one heck of a subject today that I can't wait to dig into. Pun intended. I'm sandwich. Um, but I'm here with our magnificent hosts, and I'm sure Black Nut be joining us momentarily. But we also have our guest host, Redoubt Productions. How are you doing today, Redoubt?
Oh yeah, the Macho Man Randy Savage Redoubt is here. Yes, we're gonna dig into the history. Yes, we're gonna dig deep. Yeah,
History is a long time.
we're gonna dig deep. It's as deep in the ground as like a Slim Jim, except you can't snap it to the ground. You can only dig it.
All I can do
All
is
right.
woo,
Go ahead. How you doing, R8 Snow?
I'm being Ric Flair now. So if he's gonna do
Oh,
my
God.
Ric Flair, woo, woo. I can't quite get it because I don't have that bass rumble to go with it, which makes the woo really deep and satisfying. So
No,
it sounds
there's
like a
there's
chipmunk.
few people that can do Rick right. Jay Lethal is one of them. I mean, there's also the Ultimate Kahuna. He could do it too.
Oh, real, yeah. Kahuna can do it. Yeah, I lack the bass. I lack the bass in my voice to do it. So I'm so sorry. I have failed you all as a Ric Flair impersonator. So congratulations though on being Macho Man Randy Savage, and congratulations to you, James, on being a sandwich.
Thank you. It is fine being a sandwich usually, but I have to live out in the wilderness. I cannot go too close to civilization. There's a lot of hungry people there.
Well, don't you like decay if you're out in the
It really,
weather long enough?
Well, I have to
Go
at
moldy.
times risk going into town to procure some preservatives to keep my form.
Oh, it all makes sense now.
Yes, I bathe in the preservatives like Baron Harkonnen.
that is very nice. That's very very thought provoking to think
What a
of.
visual.
I
Yeah, I
arise from the preservatives.
that's awesome.
Hey, Black Knight, thank you, dear sir, for
Yeah.
joining us. How are you
Hello,
doing,
hello.
sir?
Yeah, I had like a cough.
Oh no.
I inhaled some dust. It's,
Yeah,
yeah.
you can't do.
I'm sorry.
You're not supposed to, honey. I'm sorry.
That's okay. It happens, man. You're often on time, and the stream is barely started. We're getting off. And Readout, why don't you tell us what you've been up to lately before we dig into this subject of ours?
Oh God, what have I been up to? Have not been really active on the channel this past month. Been very busy though. Unfortunately, mostly with college and work. But I am working on the side on a few things. I got a crap ton of papers over here of different potential episodes of retracing history we could do later in the year. So I'm doing research on that. A couple things up the bat. I did not know until recently that Herbert Morrison, the WLS anchor who went and documented the Hindenburg disaster. You know, the guy that goes,
Yeah.
"Oh, the humanity." Yeah, he's from southwestern Pennsylvania. So
Yeah.
I'm going to go visit his grave in his hometown in the near future. We're going to do a biography all about Herbert Morrison. Very excited about that. The voice behind the Hindenburg disaster. And it's looking like this summer we're going to do the Battle of Lake Erie. And it's going to take multiple episodes to cover it properly because it's not just everybody thinks Lake Erie is just like this one little spot. It's like, no, it's one of the Great Lakes. You know, gotta start where the ships are built in Erie, Pennsylvania. Then gotta go the whole way to Put-in Bay, Ohio, where the battle actually is. And
Wow.
well, while you're out there, you might as well talk about the land campaign everybody forgets was happening in the buildup to the naval engagement. So it seems that's gonna be the big traveling next year. And then, unrelated history, completely unrelated. I think we're actually going to have an actual video review on the Fubar Digital Lounge. That's the other channel I created a few years ago to try to be about pop culture. And then me and my friends keep losing time. But I'm working on a review for the anime Blue Gender, which I watched just a
Okay.
couple weeks ago. And
Nice.
I put it in, wasn't expecting to like it, really enjoyed it. I also have my criticisms of it. And you're going to hear that all in the near future in a video. And either you're going to hit the like button and enjoy it, or you're going to still hit the like button because it's horrible. But it's so bad, it's good. The review, it's entertaining you.
Well, that you're doing that. I'm always excited to see the guys, branching out and doing their different things. Just because there's so much out there, so there's not enough people cover the vast canopy of pop culture and everything else. It's wonderful. You guys cover.
Yeah, definitely. A Black Knight. Have you been up to anything interesting recently?
Well, my Tuesdays, because it is there on Tuesday, after
Poetry.
all. Yeah, yeah,
Poetry.
poetry. I wrote the tanker poem to early morning, and then I wrote another one, and then I wrote two haiku, and then I spent the rest of the day doing a combination of edits, and since I've been working on a new shallow fantasy story for my Substack. I think I told you about last time. I told you about it last time. Blowing Frost. It's set in a more darkish fantasy setting, the metropolis of Krat, and recently it has been exploding in views and comments and restacks. So I may have to focus more time, invest more time in it.
It's a wise move.
Yeah, apart from my regular Sci Friday Vote Your Adventure story, which it's as you know the second part of the Province of Terrans trilogy, and this one is about a spacer's exploration of an ancient derelict, which so far I've been getting a ton of comments, a lot of votes, because it's an interactive story, and the reader is actively stirring the ship, so to speak. And I think the last one has like over 30 comments or something.
Really exploded.
Yeah, it's
Nice.
it detonated. Yeah.
That's great to hear, man. It's great to hear when one of your works really goes out there, because you put a lot of effort and you put out a lot of good stuff.
Yeah.
All right. Now, with that said, R.H. Snow, we don't want to skip over you. What have you been up to?
Well, first of all, I moved into the Wonder Bunker, so welcome to the Wonder Bunker. I like to say it that way because it makes it sound really cool. And actually, it's just a Quonset hut. You saw it on my Substack. So we've been working on that. So I'm supposed to be.
I love that.
Did you see it?
I looked through all the pictures you made, and I really love the bed. The bed is especially cozy.
I made that out of a bamboo hoop and a tablecloth. And it's an old.
No. You didn't make it from some mundane stuff. This is the Wonder Bed.
Yeah. Oh, excuse me. Thank you. It is the Wonder. You're right. It is the Wonder Bed. I am so excited now. I have a Wonder Bed. So it's actually off the grid, except for. Sort of fans. I mean, the camping in it, because I'm not like off the grid, like cool off the grid where you have the solar panels and stuff set up. So instead, I'm just like camping in it. Basically, I don't have a shower over here yet. I go over to the big house to do that, but we're working on it, and so it's just cozy. It's fun, and it does get cold though. That is one thing, because it's not insulated yet. I have all the curtains up, and I'm like, cool. But I used to camp out all the time. I just loved camping, and I mean camping out like as in a half shelter where you're in a tent with ice forming on the inside of it because it was December, and so it feels like it's luxury compared to that, because I did primitive camping actually. When I was with the Boy Scouts, I taught primitive camping. Actually did a couple of courses with that, and so I really enjoyed it. Survival camping, things like that, and of course I'm not really able to do that now, so this is kind of like a harkening back to it. I can hear the outside. It's a little closer to nature, but without the bugs, which is awesome because it's got screened windows, which is nice. So it's a little different for me, but and it's I really have been enjoying it. It's a way to touch grass without actually touching any grass, because the
You're touching a bunker right now,
Yeah, I'm touching the bunker. I'm
and not
touching,
just the bunker. You're touching the Wonder Bunker.
yeah,
Yeah,
touching.
The
it's a
Wonder
higher
Bunker.
stage of touching grass.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, so I can't get out as much, so I touch the Wonder Bunker instead. Yeah, so I've been doing that, but I've also been illustrating my book, my Caballeros del Camino, which is out to format. I swear to you, it's out to format. But each time
Nice.
I've got another illustration I want to do, and I'll see it in my head, and I'll be like, I've got to do this one scene. It needs to be done. It's there are things that beg for an illustration. And because there's such a large cast of characters as we go further in the series, it starts off with just Rose and the Watcher. And then we end up in the first series, which is actually the first 3 books, Watcher. It is just Rose and the Watcher pretty much. And then we meet Evangelo, and then we meet Dominic, who is the mastermind behind the revolution. And then we go to Purgatory in books 4, 5, and 6. And so this cast suddenly grows when they go to the town of Purgatory. And then we have our main cast. We have our primary characters, we have our secondary characters, and I love to draw these guys. And we have tertiaries too. We have ones that show up that are sort of secondary to the story or tertiary to the story. They come in and they add something. They add a storyline, or they add something that gets us further down the road on the revolution. But I love to draw these people. They're so real to me. I can see them in my head. And I actually wrote a poem about that this week, about being able to actually reach out and almost touch them. When we read books, we touch these characters. And so and it was a rhyming haiku, by the way. I don't know why, but for some reason I can rhyme haiku, which I think is kind of cool. I don't know if that's allowed. Is that even allowed? But so I wrote about that.
I don't care if it's allowed.
Thank you. But so
You're writing it. You shouldn't care. Is
So
it 575? It is 575, right?
It's all 575. It rhymes.
It just happens to rhyme.
Yeah.
Don't care.
Okay, fine. But so I have to draw it. So I've got this every week I say I have 2 more illustrations to do because they keep popping up. So I swear this last ones. It is absolutely the last ones. I'm on the second to last one right now. I've got 1 more to do, which is the big battle. Usually there is some sort of conflict that will develop. Now I don't have a formula, but like everything, there is a conflict that will develop during the course of the story. Because I believe in action. I love writing action sequences. I love writing fights. And there's always something that's going to be, because this is about a dangerous world and a dangerous land. So I'm like, well, dude, I need to draw this. If this was a comic book, this would be like the splash page. And I'm really struggling. And this is me being honest here. My eyes are degrading. They have been. And you guys know my story. I've got keratoconus, and so it distorts everything. And I just went back and upgraded my supplements that I take to try to keep my eyes going. But so when I think about this, I'm like, if I don't draw this now, I may never get the chance. But it takes me longer now to draw a decent picture that looks like it should be somewhere, maybe. And so I'm having to work harder at it to get the same amount of work done. So you'll hear me over here screechy scratchies because I'm actually trying to get this thing done. And but yeah, just pray for my eyes because I'm trying to get the book and everything else done before I lose my eyesight, before I have to use assistive technology to do it. And if I can get it done without assistive technology, that's going to be my big goal.
Well, we definitely be praying for you, that's for sure. But you've gotten a lot done so far in this series of yours. Like, how many books have you finished so far?
This will be the 8th one. This is the 8th in the series. There's actually there's a TTRPG module, which I did do and it's got a world guide that goes with it. And so those are actually 2 separate projects that in the world guide is like 96 pages long with illustrations. And so of characters and different people that are all in the first series Watcher. And it actually goes into Purgatory as well. So it has the backstories, it has all the information. And it was just my hand-drawn notes. It was literally me just writing notes for myself. And I was like, hey, this could be like a monster manual, except it's a character guide. And so I put that in there and I was like, dude, I have this. I might as well make a module. So I ended up going with Jonathan from Sojourner, and he, Sojourner's Awake, and he helped me create a module for it and a system. And I actually really want to, if I can, to make this into an open world TTRPG as the actual 4th leg of the entire series is the open world RPG that could be played with it. So I've got those, and then I've got 8 books that are currently, the 8th book is already done, and the 9th book is already formed. It's just got to be finished out so it can be released this year also. That's Hellbilly Highway. And so that leads me up to the end of the Road series. That will be 9 books. And then we have the last 3 books, which I may consolidate them into one and then do a second edition where I fix all the typos that I made for the first one, because it was the first time and there was like right in the middle of COVID. And the editors were actually people I knew from my hometown. It was like, so we just did the best we could with what we had. So I'm thinking about going back and doing a second edition for the whole series and then really marketing it, because everybody told me if you finish the series first, then you can market it. If you haven't finished the series, people will not sometimes pick it up because they're afraid you won't finish the series. They don't want to start something that they can't finish or that they have to wait a long. And they have been burned over and over again. There's so many writers that have abandoned series, or sometimes through no fault of their own. It just happens. And so I understand that feeling. So I'm like, I'm trying to get this series finished. Then I'll release the second edition with big chunkies and the hardbacks. And then we'll really start the earnest business of actually marketing the series. Probably
we'll definitely have to touch base on marketing in the future for a subject matter. I think we may have done it in the past, but it's definitely a huge portion of getting your book out there. That's for sure. But with that said, I think it's time that we dig into our subject matter here. And Lady Snow, I know that you were speaking particularly of before, you've mentioned how your story is actually historically based in Texas, correct? Or like it pulls from the history of Texas.
Yes, it actually uses real places, and we always put a disclaimer in there that any relation to any place is purely fictional or it's coincidental. Well, it's really hard to say it because I'm actually using places around me. I know these places and these things, but they're in a different world, so it's not concurrent with this world. They're in a fantasy setting that is, it's in a near future apocalypse with a gap. So we're not right at the end of the apocalypse. We don't actually get the bombs fall. That's part of the novella that actually is the backstory, which is also already written. So I forget to add that. That's the 10th book. And it hasn't been released yet. I've got to get it off Vella. And so I have that background of having the history of Texas, of what it is, a near future with the potential for what we have as population growth, things like that included, and then the actual places, the landscape itself, and some landmarks that might be available are in the book. And so I rely heavily on local histories. I frequently reference and put my characters in places that are actually historical monuments. For instance, in the first book, it talks about Reunion Camp. This is actually the Confederate reunion grounds in Texas. And it is one of the first places right across the lake from where the proclamation was read to free the slaves. And so when the Emancipation Proclamation was read, they actually had some of the slave owners and that were former get together and decided to give one of the plantations that was down in the bottoms, which was prime land, gave it to the people who were formerly his slaves. And they continued to work it. And he bought land up there and opened up the Confederate Reunion Ground. And of course, across from that is the Emancipation Park, the Juneteenth Park, which is one of the first ones in Texas. And so we have both of those mentioned in there. And the setting for the Watchers' incarceration at the Reunion Prison Camp is actually the Confederate Reunion Ground. They lost the letters off of the sign, and all it says now is Reunion. And so they have that ruin of the Confederate Reunion Ground with its beautiful large gazebo and the cannon, which is still there, as obviously in disrepair, but they try to keep it up. And we've included not only that historical location, but other historical locations around the county and around Texas as we start to move through the area. And this includes also roads, historical trails like Trammel's Trace, a lot of references in the book, especially with regards to culture of freedom and independence, are directly related to the Texas Revolution, and there are a lot of mirrors. In fact, each character has a mirror in the Texas Revolution. If you figure out which ones they are, you get yourself a prize, because I did look at the lives of people like Stephen F. Austin, Davy Crockett, Jim Bowie, and many other leading lights that are in the Texas Revolution, and directly correlated them in some ways to, as sort of mentors, let's put it that way, to each character.
That definitely is a lot. So history could be used to kind of guide a story, build that foundation that came before. And in a lot of ways, you could do justice to a lot of shrouded history that people would otherwise not really know. But, go ahead.
Almost. I hadn't really thought of that being that book. When I look back at it, it becomes an alternate history because it's an alternate future, but it still has fantasy elements and sci-fi elements. So it is such a genre bending book or series that it becomes hard to quantify, but it very heavily relies on real places and real history to build the world in which we're telling the story.
Yes. And speaking of real history, that actually reminded me of a real historical event that I think is quite pertinent to this conversation. And that was, I believe it was a shark attack in New Jersey that left a number of people dead. And
yes, 4 confirmed killed, occurred in 1916.
Exactly. Wow. I knew Redoubt would know exactly where I'm going with this one, because this shark attack would inspire the movie Jaws that everyone knows, which would then inspire the world to see sharks as a menace, and would essentially lead to a lot of endangered species of sharks in the long run.
Oh wow, yeah. Well, also sharks are, when you have some of the things that they make out of it and the cartilage itself. What most people don't know is that there used to be a thing called Preparation H, which was used for sensitive subjects. It was made from shark byproducts, and actually it worked very well. It was actually good. You could put, if your eyes were puffy, you could put the Preparation H under your eyes, and it would actually make them shrink. It won't do that anymore because they no longer make it from sharks. So women all over the world are sad because their faces look puffy because there's no more shark in Preparation H.
Another byproduct.
Yes.
But Redoubt, as our guest, I'm sure you had 1 or 2 things you wanted to tear into.
Well, I didn't know what I should truly come to the table tonight with, so I guess I'll just go to the classics. If you're talking about historical influences on media, look no farther than Homer's The Odyssey.
Oh yeah.
It's one of I'd say the oldest pop culture texts that have survived so long. I mean, the Odyssey's always been there, passed down for generations, passed down for the centuries. I mean, it's been adapted in so many different ways and has inspired so many offshoots. And the original Odyssey, it is basically a piece of historical fiction reciting the Trojan War, using the Trojan War as basically as the setting.
Wow.
Then, of course, you have my favorite adaptation of Brother Art Thou, which in 1930s Mississippi, of all that wonderful bluegrass music. But
Well, the Odyssey is so timeless for that reason. It is a soldier returning, but there's the fantastic journey on the way home. There's the faithful dog. There's the wife who waits, and there's the suitors who have taken over his entire house. It's just great from start to finish. There's all of this interpersonal drama and fighting and people that you really want to see dead. And I say that guardedly because I hate saying that because I love people. But I would imagine, and I'm just speaking this as a woman, but if you were a dude and you've been away to war and then you find out when you get home that there's 50 guys camping out in your house waiting for your wife, you're probably going to be hacked off. Just maybe. I think that would probably be. And then the dog, and he wags, just that one time and then dies. It's that's the worst thing ever. And it's so this is it's classic for a reason, because it's not just a story, it's a good story. It's a story that's well told with all the elements and the heartstrings and the fantastic fighting and the combat, but also that element of when he comes home, it's not just hooray, I'm here. He has to fight to regain what he lost.
And the tale of a soldier returning home, as you mentioned, is timeless. I think even in the current day, there's so many people that can relate to that. Somebody comes back from a long period of time and they want to get back to, back to their old routine. And you can never go back. It's too hard to return.
Yeah. Well, this happens to everyone. And and you guys have heard me talk about living in a family that we have warriors in our family. We just always have somebody, every generation, someone. is the one. And so for us, and it's my daughter, my grandmother, my father. It wasn't me, because I was not created for that life. I actually thought about doing it. I went out and tried to take the physical. At the time I couldn't pass it because I just was not built the right way. And here I am now. I was fit, I just couldn't do it. But that coming home, you're never that same person that you were when you left. You cannot really, you can go home, but you will not be there. It will be who you are now, the person that you hope to meet on the way home, that you hope to become that boy again that was so innocent and full of life, or that girl that went off believing that she would save the world. And you come back and you're changed, you're hardened, you'll meet them on the way, perhaps. You'll see yourself in passing in the mirror, but you're not the same person. And the same thing happens in the Odyssey, that he's not who he was. And that those years that have gone by and everything he's lost, he regains something, but the man who comes back is not the same man who left.
Now, jumping a little bit forward, I'll also bring up, now, if you're going to talk about maybe media where the fictitious version is what everybody remembers, an historical event. I mean, if you look at William Shakespeare's accounting of the rise and fall of Julius Caesar, that's basically why so many people remember who Julius Caesar was. And it's a very fantasized, fictitious variant of what happened. But I would say that play alone did so much to keep Julius Caesar's name alive into the current day, because there were so many Roman, so many Roman senators, and later you have your emperors that came in there, and he's the one that everybody remembers, even though he actually barely had power long enough because of the coup that resulted of him ascending to power. But because of that play, everybody knows his name and knows the story and the allegories that have followed relating to the Ides of March and everything when you get into political rhetoric in more recent times. So that's also a case there. There's historical fiction right there. Then if you get to I'll give you a more smaller scale event. What's interesting is, one of my big subjects is the American Civil War, the Battle of Gettysburg in particular. Now, for decades, from the battle happening all the way through the mid to late 20th century, if you ask somebody who the hero for the Union Army on July 2nd, 1863 was, they would say Gouverneur K. Warren. And probably nobody watching tonight knows that name. But if you were a veteran of the war or a descendant of a veteran, you knew who Warren was. He was in charge of the engineers for the Army of the Potomac at the time of the battle. He would later get command of the Union Army 5th Corps, but he's in charge of the engineers. He's sent up to this high ground that overlooks the battlefield, and he quickly realizes the strategic significance of it and immediately starts grabbing whatever units he can find and puts this ad hoc defense on top of Little Round Top in the nick of time before the Confederate attack begins. So much so that he gets a monument of him. There's a statue of him to this day on Little Round Top, complete with his field glasses. That was the hero Little Round Top to the veterans. Now, if you fast forward to today, nobody knows who Gouverneur K. Warren is. But everybody knows who Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain is in the 20th Maine. And that's mainly because of a little book called The Killer Angels, which became the movie Gettysburg. And that movie partly focuses on the 20th Maine and their defense of Little Round Top. Before the book and the movie came out, people did not know about Chamberlain. They did not really know, at least in the public zeitgeist. He wasn't like a name thrown around. And then those two things came out and it completely inverted. Now everybody knows about the 20th Maine. I mean, the 20th Maine are talked to death about at Gettysburg, to the point why I tend to skirt away talking about them. So I'm like, there's so much spoken about them. And now the supposed hero of Gettysburg is now a unsung hero. Somehow Warren's now become to like the back pages of history. So that's an example where you have media influencing how we discuss history, how, the perspectives changed over the years.
Yeah, that's definitely something we continuously see even today in a lot of stuff. Like characters survive through movies, and often people watch a movie and they'll walk away with the facts of a movie believing this is what happened. Like what was that one? Those two movies that were doing really good when every other movie was failing. Barbenheimer. the recent Oppenheimer.
Mm,
I'm sure
Yeah.
there was some aspects that may have been a little bit that they took the source material and were a little bit liberal with it, but there'll be individuals out there who see that and just claim it as truth that, oh, this is all that happened.
Yeah, I
They
think you're right. They have a tendency to make a. Did you want to say something, Black Knight? Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say something a little different about Oppenheimer. Christopher Nolan tried it, which is interesting, actually talking about how you handle history and fiction. He had this motif where he was going to film stuff that we factually knew happened. At least we have all this archival evidence to say this is what happened. All those stuff was shot in black and white. And then everything that's left in color, that's more ambiguous. That's more from personal accounts, or, well, the writers and the director just making crap up also. So they try to actually play with that black and white and color motif.
I think that is fantastic. I have not seen it yet, and I've heard a lot of people brag on it. And it's something I need to go watch. And I said I've been shying away from going into watching movies because I'm writing this book and I don't want to be influenced overtly or covertly. And so I've got to get it done. And so I've heard enough about Oppenheimer and the mystique of Oppenheimer. They're trying to capture this, what it means to be a person who's I've become, destruction. That ability to look and see what you have created and know that it is greater than perhaps any good you have done. I think that they did well with it in the sense of creating that zeitgeist for the audience, and to use the black and white versus the color, I think is a perfect thing. I didn't realize that they had done that. I love that because that way you can directly point and say, okay, here in the film, they're telling the truth. They know this is what was taking place to the best of their ability. Now we can say, okay, the other part may be, fictionalized. And it makes it very clear. And I think that's a fantastic device to use because I haven't seen it yet, but that sounds wonderful.
Indeed. And there's also a lot of very important people throughout history whose names are mainly forgotten as well. What's it called? I think of who was that gentleman that died and started the First World War? You think his name would be forever remembered throughout history, but
The Archduke.
Ferdinand.
yeah, the Archduke. Yeah.
Yes, the Archduke, like mostly forgotten by most people who wouldn't know, and yet it was his death that caused one of the largest catastrophes in human history.
Well,
So it's interesting.
Let's talk about catastrophe for a minute because you're touching on this. There was a time, and I'm saying this, and Redoubt knows, and so does Black Knight, when everybody knew that and they never saw it in a movie. We're now being taught by media. We're not learning this in school. They're not learning almost any history. They're learning history from media. Now, there was a time previous to schools being widely available that, yes, media introduced history to the viewers. Shakespeare's plays are in large part, they are a retelling of great historical events or of retellings of lore that are out there. I said previously this week that history is the lore of mankind. Even as we have lore for Warhammer or we have lore for Star Wars, history is the lore of mankind. It's our story. It's what we did. People knew it. They studied it as if it were Warhammer or a game. They knew everything about it. They could tell. My father could tell you every Civil War general that lived because he was fascinated with the Civil War. We now have a generation that doesn't know about it unless they are told by media that these things existed. And in fact, that's been going on for about the last 20 years, that history has been taken away. Now you're seeing the statues pulled down. You're seeing everything else. And once again, and I know I'm beating the drum, but I've been hot and heavy on it this week. This is related to Marxist revolution. It is how it is done. And this, of course, it was done also in the Egyptian times. And in Rome, you would pull down the previous conquerors. But that was usually done with the behest of the people. The people have not asked for this. The people have not asked to have their history erased. We had to fight to make sure that nobody touched that centigraph in front of the Alamo in San Antonio. They came to say they were going to move it, and the people said no. But everywhere else, statues, images have been taken down. History is being dismantled without the will or the knowledge of the people, even sometimes. They just turn around and it's gone. It's just gone. Teddy Roosevelt, that fantastic piece of work, which actually was done in homage to the peoples that are represented in it. They are leading him in. He's on the horse, but they lead him in to this grand vision that he has, with them by his side, not behind him. And it's gone. It's just gone. Where did the metal go? Where did the brass go? Who bought it? Who took it apart and sold it? It wasn't because of ideology and everybody was just tired and wanted to move on. It's because they did it by force and by deceit. We're losing our history, and in order for us to grasp it, each person must decide that they want to know the story of who they are and what is around them. If you find yourself in a local place, learn the local history. Learn those things. Maybe you can't go back and learn all the Civil War generals, but you can find out what happened in your town during that period. You can find out what happened in your town during World War II or during the 1950s or during the civil rights revolutions of the 1960s. You can find out who was there and what happened. You can do it. Your history is important to you. It is your story. It is your lore. Learn it.
I do have to point, if you're going to bring up Teddy, this is just me being nitpicky. Remember, guys, Teddy did not lead the Rough Riders in San Juan Hill. He led them on Kettle Hill. And the Battle of Bunker Hill was not fought on Bunker Hill. It was, in fact, Breed's Hill.
I know it. Everybody's...
We got them over. Okay, I'm good now. I'm happy. But I do have to laugh sometimes. This, I guess, kind of brings up into historical influences on media and literature. Some of the weirdest names like battles get, or like where events occur. And it's like, that's not even where the event occurred, but it's associated with it. Like, and it's because somebody's like letter or somebody's intention. And it's just like, nope, that sticks. That's what we're doing. That's the name now. It sounds so good.
Yes, it actually would start off with probably letters to home. And I think that we have a period, especially at the first of the Civil War, where letters from soldiers were shared with some of the local newspapers. So-and-so reports that her son has checked in from this place and there was a battle. And they would actually talk about this in the local newspapers. It wasn't, they did vet like things that were supposed to happen in the future, but they didn't really parse out things that had already happened. So you would hear about it from the soldiers writing home, how they would talk about a particular thing that took place. And that would mention the name that they knew, like Bull Run or Manassas, which is why you have different names for the Battle of Manassas and Battle of Bull Run. Because one is for the southern side, and they had a completely different set of people saying, well, this is what it is. And for years, I was confused because I thought Manassas and Bull Run were two different battles. And my father had to teach me, no, these were the same battle. It was just one side of the Southerners, I believe, called it Manassas, and that the Northerners called it Bull Run, I believe. Is that correct, Redoubt?
Oh, it gets more confusing when you realize there was two different battles on the same piece of property.
Yeah. It's like, okay, so tell us about this, because I am still confused to this very day.
So the first battle of Manassas, that's fought in 1861. That's what they call it, the first major land battle of the American Civil War. And really, this was the one that everybody went out, literally all the wealthy in Washington, D.C., strolled out in their carriages, had a picnic miles away to watch the battle unfold, because this was going to be the grand battle of our little Civil War. And then Stonewall Jackson showed up and sent Irvin McDowell's Union Army running back to D.C. And everybody quickly realized we were way in over our heads. Though, to be fair, both sides were a complete mess in that first battle. You got Union wearing gray, Confederate wearing blue. It was an S show. It was a big S show for both sides.
Outfits. I think they were wearing like the red fezzes and other things too, were they not?
Yeah, it got so desperate. Apparently, Jefferson Davis himself would eventually ride by rail to, not necessarily on the battlefield, but he was like a few miles behind the scenes and was almost personally ready to take charge of the whole situation before Jackson showed up. Like, it was bad. And then over a year later, another battle occurred there. That was where Robert E. Lee defeated General Pope's Union Army of Virginia. Yeah, let that get confusing. And that's where we hear a lot of people talk about a railroad cut at Manassas. That's where that fight occurs. The reason there's two battles that occur on the same property, it's a few miles outside of Washington, D.C., and it's near a critical rail junction into Washington, D.C. So that's why there was two battles that occurred on the same piece of ground.
Wow. Okay, so that makes all the sense.
There's a
Really?
lot of history like that, you know. The you can't always just trust the names that you know of them today because they might not even be the names that they initially were given at the time.
Now, I will bring up just kind of pivoting things a little bit because we can talk about media that's based on history and this is a accountant of history. So what about the media that takes partial influence? It's not like a historical piece that's
Yeah.
like, hey, this was a cool idea and I used that to inspire my story. I mean, it could be something as simple as like Hunt for Red October, which is inspired by multiple instances of Soviet forces mutinying to the United States. I think it's totally, if you want to, there's two different stories on what it's influenced by. The popular story is it's based on the K-129, which was a Soviet sub that exploded, and the United States discovered about its location before the Soviets did, and then tried to raise the sub. Didn't go well. All you know is a CIA project, so that kind of explains itself.
Well, there.
Uh, then there was an effort by a Soviet warship to actually try to essentially mutiny against the Soviet Union. So it's kind of those two events that nobody knows for certain. That's what kind of inspired Tom Clancy to write what became Hunt for Red October.
I,
But I'm
I,
sure there's fictitious stuff like the Colonial Marines and Aliens. James Cameron's been pretty adamant they were heavily inspired by Marine forces going into Vietnam. So there's another, and that's in a sci-fi setting, showing you how you have history inspiring other media. So that always really interests me, how people take little nuggets of our past and then go down and make their own fictitious world around it.
Man in the High Tower. That's another one.
oh yeah.
World War II inspired. There's a lot that pull from World War II, definitely. You know, one thing that is another. I guess you can say it's how contemporary history and sort of like the aura for which we live in can affect film. Like I remember seeing, I should say, the culture for which we live in, which obviously heavily affects film. But I remember seeing this funny meme where it showed like Rome, and it's just this Roman soldier. It says, "I will die for honor," and then it says France, and it's this French knight says, "I will die for love," and then and then it says um, Russia, and it's just this Russian peasant says, "I will die,"
I saw
and
that. I
and
saw
I
that.
think of I
No,
think of
that's
all
not true. That's not true. The Russian peasant would say, "I will die for potato."
for potato. I'm
That is
thinking of
more accurate.
all the sort of Russian influenced literature I've come into contact with, and a lot of it is surrounding that, like death and suffering, a lot more than a lot of other sort of say Greek or
Yeah,
French
but
influences.
that was being popularized in the West for a reason. It's the Russian literature as a whole is not just doom and gloom.
Tell us about the historic influences in some Russian literature.
Yeah.
Hmm. I could tell you perhaps a little bit about early Russian science fiction, um, because I drew some inspiration from it, a little bit, just a little bit. Um, as you know, the bulk of it is hmm, perhaps pre-flood history, and then you have some medieval, early and late medieval stuff, but that's not that interesting. Perhaps the the period of the Second World War is the most interesting to people, to contemporary um, viewers and readers. And I, as you know, I have built an alternate history universe, which is, of course, it's not purely, how should I put it, purely mundane like ours. You have a lot of fantasy in the mix, but as so far as the historical inspiration go, perhaps the best, which is the best um, historical, like the most touched upon, is the period of the Second World War, which is the same but also different. Um, it does not start the way it did start here. You also have some, like I said, some major similarities but also differences. For example, you don't have the Germany as we had it. It's a different nation. Part of Europe is also quite different. Um, in this alternate universe, it's actually the Soviet Union that starts the war, which is also being originally Stalin's plan. He would stoke the war, would help a certain Austrian painter with resources and such. And he was quite expecting the whole thing to get bogged down, just like the First World War. And Western imperialists would bleed themselves dry, and then the victorious liberating army of the proletariat, Soviet Red Army, would come in and rescue the oppressed workers and peasants of Europe and then the world. Of course, it did not happen. Just like most of the grandiose planning of the Soviet Union at the time, which were grandiose for sure, but as you know, the Holodomor, a little thing called the Holodomor, which was
You're breaking up a little bit there.
was not supposed to happen. Really? I am? That's strange.
Yeah, you're at least on my end. I don't know if it's just me. Yeah, a little robotic
It's
there.
coming in fine for me so far.
Okay.
at least.
All right, it's probably
Okay.
just me then.
And yeah, it's I don't think it's on my site. I just checked.
All right,
But
good. Sorry about that.
but there are things like the so-called pre-dynastic Egypt times and early medieval, the pre-medieval periods, the disappearance of the Roman Empire, and which was actually defeated much earlier than in our timeline, in our universe, and the preservation of Egypt. I'm not quite sure what would be the most interesting bit.
All of it has interest. It's all, when you actually start looking at the history of the world, there's always something fascinating about it. You were talking about how a lot of people weren't interested unless it started with the Second World War for Russia and the Balkan states and Eastern Europe. But in actuality, my father, and I can say this from experience, my father in the 1950s, people were very fascinated with Soviet Union in the United States because they couldn't see, they couldn't get there. There wasn't really any information about that area or China because it was locked down under the Iron Curtain. And so he gathered up all of the great Russian composers and would listen to the music for hours on end. Rimsky-Korsakov, Tchaikovsky, and reading Dostoevsky and others, trying to learn Russian also because he was an engineer and a scientist. And we actually had many technical papers that were written in Russian and in German, and so they had to learn them. So my father taught me a little bit of Russian, Dostoevsky, and a few other things, because he wanted us to know that this was a culture, not just a communist country, but a people that were actually proud of who they were. And the same thing with the Ukraine and the Eastern Bloc countries, Bulgaria and other places. They each had their own charm and their own beauty. And 1950s Americans were fascinated with the world because so much of it was just now beginning to become accessible to them. They finally had air flight, and they finally had the ability to go around. And so your average 1950s American would have some interest in Latin America or interest in the Soviet Union because it was forbidden and therefore wonderful.
Yeah, I can tell you a little bit about the Soviet Union. Would you like me to tell you about our Soviet Union or my Soviet Union?
Yours. I want you to tell actually about Bulgaria, and I know that because it's different there. Their experiences there.
All right. What bit do you want me to tell you about Bulgaria? What historical bit? Because otherwise it's quite a huge topic. You know.
Oh, what are some interesting history that you think would be good to share?
Well, all of it is interesting. Even the darkest bits, the most recent darkest bits during the communism, the quote unquote not real communism. That's a theme.
How about you tell us about the media? What the media was like? What was being produced?
The media, I mean, by the entertainment media?
Yeah.
Oh. Well, it was mostly propaganda, but you had stuff which wasn't that drenched in propaganda, of course, just like in the Soviet Union and other places. The major problem was that if you wanted to produce anything which would eventually see the light of day, you had to be part of the government sanctioned artist guild. And if you were writing anything, would it be like a radio play, a book, an article, to be published in a newspaper or magazine, or a comic book? We had some semblance of a comic book here, something.
Wow.
Yeah, which was called the Rainbow Magazine.
Nice.
Well, somewhat. But even in the realm of paintings, you had censors, and to be allowed, not acknowledged, allowed into the big scene, like the big cities scene. You had to pass mustard. You had to be vetted by the censors, just like in any similar regime. Perhaps here it wasn't. In the beginning it was quite hard, but after the 70s, I was told, before I was born, things, especially on the painting scene, they began to loosen a bit, because they have had lost a number of painters because they either imprisoned them or unalived them, and yeah, just they decided that that was a bit too much because there weren't any more painters of note. But I think on the poetry scene, they had like a lot of sponsored poets, faithful communists, who some of them were quite good, even though they were communists. But they were, I think, some of them were moderate communists. Mm, but in in the book market, we did have a resurgence of science fiction, mostly not fantasy. Like there weren't anything, almost anything. Like I'm struggling to even remember anything of fantasy ever written or produced. I think there were
Interesting.
things written, but they weren't produced because considered it was considered not progressive and bourgeois.
Really, fantasy as a whole.
Yes, yes.
Wow, I didn't
And,
know that.
science fiction was considered the way of the future. That was what is being pushed forward, and especially in the bulk of the fantasy uh, stories and books. The author had always had to like install an element, socialist or communist element, so they would be actually published. Mm, I remember that perhaps some of the best things were introduced
Yeah.
in the 80s, like the early 80s. There were like compilations of anthologies of short stories, as science fiction short stories, which were selected from Western authors with socialist leanings, and they were published. Of course, you also had like fellow communist countries, authors from communist countries which were also published. Some of them were not very good, and you also had like the old Russian um, science fiction authors, like some of the early ones. For example, one of my favorites was Alexander Belev, who wrote about cutting edge and almost like quite Star Trekish medical science fiction, um, machines which could give you the ability to enforce telepathic control over the masses and much more. That was quite interesting. But of course, we had the limitations of not knowing what the rest of the world was producing because of the Iron Curtain and such.
That's very interesting. I don't think we do too many deep dives into the available media and how it gets to that point in the cultures of the past. Let alone just Russia or Soviet Union, but also in the West back then, because they themselves had had some anti-communist leanings. Hopefully, they still do. Haha. And um, we hear stories of forms of censorship and things of that nature on this side as well, which I'm pretty sure probably didn't go anywhere near as far as they did over there, at least to my knowledge. I'm not sure. It was quite the wicked time back then, which we still talk about and make movies today, which is probably why we're still talking about it, because a lot of stuff really happened between the Cold War era and now that we really don't discuss, and a lot of people, like newer generations, don't know actually happened. Like there's people I know walking this earth that have no idea what like Operation Desert Storm was. And if you lo and behold, we don't make a lot of media based around that. And that I think in this discussion is something that I pulled is the influence of media keeps these stories of the past alive. And I would love to see, in general, just a lot more of the forgotten stories come to life because a lot of it is documented. A lot of it you always see, like on History Channel and documentations coming out, but to turn it into a narrative structure because there's a lot of really great and wondrous things. Sometimes the miraculous is so miraculous in our own history that when we try to transform it into a piece of media, we leave out portions of it because we're afraid people won't buy it. One of which was actually the movie Midway, which came out earlier this decade.
Yeah.
They left out portions. They were very accurate with the majority of the film, but there was some portions that they left out because it was just too miraculous, and they thought that well, people
Which
just aren't going to believe that.
what did they left out?
It's been a while since I heard the exact details, but it was pretty much like near miss saves and things of this nature that you would
Ah,
probably think are cliche in movies, but actually
yeah,
happen.
yeah,
One of
yeah.
which that actually entered the movie was a pilot who would unfortunately die because he was captured by the Japanese. They basically tortured him to death. Um, a Japanese bomber was getting shot down, so they were going to drop the bomber right onto the carrier, and there was no planes to take it out in the sky. So most of them were already on the ship. So one of the pilots jumped into the back gun and he shot at the bomber, changing its direction enough to where it, instead of smashing directly into the carrier, it actually hit the tail that he was on shooting from, and he survived that encounter. But the plane he was on was barely hanging on to the carrier, and it was leaning off the side. They added
Yeah.
that into the movie, and a lot of
I
people
remember that. Yeah.
who questioned that were actually questioning that, like, oh, did that really happen? You know, so it's like, yeah, a lot of crazy and miraculous stuff throughout history does happen, and it would be interesting to see a lot of it come to life, especially with the
I
technology we have
I
today.
love that. I love these bits. I can tell you more than a few about various um, instances, various battles during the Second World War. I drew inspiration from some of them. For example, there is a story from Stalingrad where a soldier was shot in the heart, and his heart stopped the bullet.
Oh my God.
But yes, that's actually a real story documented by the medical personnel in the hospital because they thought he was dead. They thought he was dead, and while they were checking the wounds and they were writing like the the death document,
Hmm.
the death waiver, so they would send it to like back to the military, and they were checking his wounds, and he woke up. His heart stopped for a while, and miraculously he didn't suffer any like brain damage. Um, he recovered fully. It was a German soldier.
Wow.
Um, Then there is that other case of um, artilleryman who was operating an anti-tank cannon. It was one of the Russian soldiers was operating an anti-tank cannon. It was in the beginning of the war, the Operation Barbarossa, and he was shot multiple times. And they saw him, like the Germans, they saw him move. He was holding a road. It was like he was being positioned in entrenchment, and he was holding the road along with other cannons, but they were destroyed. He was the last. He was the last man actually standing who actually managed to, which is like insanely hard to operate a cannon by yourself. But he was able to operate it, to aim and fire. He was wounded multiple times, and he was moving, was still shooting, and finally he stopped shooting. But they thought he was dead, but he just ran out of shells, so he crawled towards the nearest cannon to grab a shell, and he died like midway. He grabbed the shell and he was crawling back, but he died. He's actually he died of blood loss. I think he was shot 49 times.
Wow.
Oh my
And
gosh.
he was missing most of his face. He had just one eye. That's one of the, I think, one of the heroes, one of the unsung heroes of the Soviet Union. I think it's like, I would like to say that it's not the Soviet Union, it's actually Russia, but
It would be Russia, because when they were fighting for the people that were near them. They were fighting for Leningrad. They're fighting for Stalingrad. They were fighting for the people and the families they had. And when you get to that place where you're under siege, you fight for what is right in front of you and for the people you love. And the man standing beside you, that's who you fight for. And I know that you about these incredible stories, but the truth is these things really did happen. My father had a Bible, and it actually is with my nephew now. And I've told you about this before, had a metal cover on it. It actually has a dent in it where a bullet hit it. There are things, he wore it next to his head. There are amazing stories. In fact, a great story, and Redoubt, you might have actually heard of this one. I'm pretty sure it's still in print. We'll see. You won't hear me cuss very often on this, but it is actually the name of the book. It is called Badass. Look it up. It is a fantastic story of incredible heroes that are real historical figures, written in a very engaging and fun way, and an utterly consuming storyline about different people throughout history, men and women, queens and kings, and from every place, every walk of life. And he did a fantastic. Let me see if I can actually look up the author, because he was an actual professor of history, history teacher, I believe, and he actually wrote these books to try to get people interested in the history around them. People, when they fight for the man beside them. They fight for the family behind them. They may not agree with the philosophy of the government that is over them, but when you see the bullets coming, when you hear the shells falling, you will protect those you love with your life. And that's what governments rely on. That's why they put us sometimes in these places where we are fighting, and we don't know why a man or a woman will fight to the death for something they don't believe in, because they don't believe in that government. But they believe in the family they're trying to save.
Yeah. War continuously springs up in all of our medias with such a interesting message of like endearment and absolute hell. That it's like a cataclysm that echoes throughout time, that never seems to cease. Throughout every single generation there seems to be that fight or that tragedy that eventually gets some form of media made of it, or punctuates an era that produces forms of media that are of a particular time and attitude. And sometimes these things are forgotten but a lot of them are replayed over again. Like we have this war going on in Ukraine, a land that's been fought for long before any of us were born. And there's probably there is tons of literature and artworks depicting battles that happen on that land, which keeps those things, keeps a shred of it alive. And it reminds me of Native American history here on the American soil, because a lot of theirs was passed down verbally, and a lot of it is just gone. Like a lot of it's just not written down. There's hundreds of battles that have been long since forgotten. And I think when it comes to media, probably the most important one is the written word, because that keeps them alive. Even if it keeps them obscure, or if they become obscure, it keeps them alive and it keeps them from being forgotten. And an interesting one that Moral Officer Graham brought up here is the McCarthy era. There's an interesting thing here, but this is actually a example of history slightly altered. And I say slightly altered because whenever we think of McCarthy in the, I guess it's just like in the general sense, we think of history that is 100% negative and a stain on America. But when I read about McCarthy, he didn't show up until after a year when these bannings were occurring. And when they were occurring, what provoked them was that Hollywood was literally getting scripts censored by the Kremlin, and then they'd make them into movies here, and that provoked the entire thing. But those pieces are left out of our general viewpoint of history of this sin of Hollywood. I consider the major sin of Hollywood, which was literally getting a foreign intelligence agency to censor their scripts. And unfortunately, we see it today too, with them working with China, completely reshooting whole sections of a film to alter it to fit particular viewpoints. So like a lot of this stuff still going on to this day. And I think it's just like how our contemporary history is altering how we would like to see the past or view the past under particular morality or light.
Yeah, the history that we see right now, we're always seeing it through our own vision. And let me say this, McCarthy, yes, he came in because there was an actual threat out there. That threat was real. However, that overreach is actually what took the knees out from under it. And the reason why, because I'm actually talking about my own father, who when he was a veteran of World War II, had fought since he was 15, believe it or not. He lied to get in. And managed to stay in all the way through from the bombing at Pearl Harbor to Bikini Atoll in 1946. And he gets out and he decides he's going to go to school on his GI Bill. Well, he meets my mother and he goes, and it's in the 50s. He's going back to school, as always. He was always going back to school because he had all that super sweet GI Bill money. He was asked to take a oath of loyalty before he could come into Texas University. And he told him, he said, I've already taken my oath of loyalty, which is to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic, as an American citizen and as a soldier from this war. And that's all you're going to get from me. If that's not enough, then I won't come here. And they actually backed down. But it was that kind of overreach that did cause the demise of it. And part of it was probably engineered by the media and by other actors in that group that were actually trying to make it where it would become draconian. Yes, it's tough to get blackballed, and we did see some egregious errors during that period, but the threat was still real. And it's unfortunate that McCarthy became a rallying cry, and it's a lesson to us all to never let yourself become so absorbed in meeting a threat that you shoot down your own agents when you're doing it. It's always important to not have friendly fire with that, because for years my father was very angry about it and told me, said, there's no, this is a free country. I shouldn't have to tell anybody what I'm thinking in order to go to a college. And now it's the opposite. Now you have to swear that you're not going to defend anybody unless it's what the college tells you to do. So it's unfortunate that we've actually seen a complete swing of the pendulum. But yes, it actually did occur. It was an unusual period of time, and some people look at it through a lens of a fuzzy lens of warmth. It was great. There were beautiful things about it. There were wonderful things about the 1950s. And I did not experience it because I was born shortly after. But there were also some problems, and everything that we view
we should always ask the question, is this accurate? If it's represented as the most rosy of times, it's beautiful, like the movie Reds, where isn't it glorious that we're having a communist revolution? It didn't say anything bad about the wrong people. Then you're probably looking at propaganda. And if it looks terrible, just terrible, there's nothing good, nothing ever happened that was good, there's no good people there, that's probably also propaganda. Somewhere in the middle, if there is an inkling, you will hear stories from both sides. For instance, in the case of the Battle of the Alamo, where we have documents that actually exist of Mexican soldiers talking about some of the soldiers at the Alamo. And they described how they fought bravely and died. These are probably real, because they also talk about Santa Anna being a glorious leader and everybody was very excited. And yet there was this other thing. There's an element of authenticity. And when media reflects that, it's more likely to be telling the truth. If we don't see something of that authentic voice behind it, of a person who is telling you the beauty of the sunrise, even as they're telling you the bombs are falling, then chances are that they may not have been there. There has to be something that shows you that the real human is there. If it's only through one lens and the lens is all dark and horrible and foreboding, then perhaps there's something missing. And I think that we have to be aware of that in our own time as well.
Definitely. Actually, especially in our own time, we never had so much media coming out so rapidly with in so many different fashions. Everything around us seems to be influenced by media, or media trying to influence us in our contemporary time. And often they'll use the past, especially here in the U.S. They'll use the sins of the past to try to force it upon us to obtain some sort of future, and then use the media, I guess, much like Black Knight, you said, propaganda, pushing the party message and not backing away. So it's another form of the echoes of the past repeating themselves.
Yeah.
Oh, and that book, by the way, is Ben Thompson wrote it. And it's actually still out there. You can get it on digital. If you can, get it. Badass. It's by Ben Thompson. Great book. It is fantastic. If you want to read about real heroes that did real things and how crazy some of it is, when you were talking about how crazy the things that they did, almost seems impossible that they did these things. It has great Native American heroes. It has American heroes. It has Canadians, believe it or not, trappers. It has people from all over the world, men and women who are absolutely the toughest people that you will ever meet. You're not going to see anything nearly like this book out there now, because it celebrates toxic masculinity and everything about it that's wonderful. And so if you can, look it up. It's Badass by Ben Thompson. A relentless onslaught of the toughest warlords, Vikings, samurais, pirates, gunfighters, and military commanders to ever live. And it's actually a series, and I love it. So read it, because it influenced my series very deeply. I love that thing.
Very cool. It was also you mentioned Texas there and the Alamo. Davy Crockett in himself was a media figure. And that in itself kind of put an interesting, I think he's an interesting character throughout history, because he was both this gentleman who was an outdoorsman, and he became a media figure in his time, of a living legend with all these
he always wrestled with the legend around him. It's interesting. He's one of those characters, like, the legend had come after. The legend was already there, and then he had to reconcile with it.
Yes. In fact, it actually touches this on Lon Tinkle's 13 Days to Glory, which becomes the movie The Alamo. He talks about it, where Travis says, "I did not expect you to be so well spoken." He was literate. He spoke properly. He was capable of presenting himself in Congress and as a lawmaker. And at the same time, he said he would use to his advantage the homespun rube to make a point, to get his way, and to highlight who he was representing. And I think that we forget these are actually real humans. Yes, he was a celebrity. In fact, we have a town that was named for him when he came through. He came through Texas on his way to the Alamo, and it's named Crockett. And he stopped over there. And then people would commemorate him as he came and went. They would gather to hear him speak because he was a celebrity.
Yeah, and it must have been for the time. I mean, you don't have television, you don't have anything. The only way you're going to see him is in real life or in like a playbill or something, somebody pretending to be them, which many people were. The play told many of the stories that would later on be turned into movies that we today still see, like Romeo and Juliet and many other Shakespearean plays that have survived, which is interesting because Shakespeare in his day, I believe, was considered a bit lowbrow compared to others. And yet here we are decades later, and he's one of the few that survived, pop culturally speaking, I should say. Like, you go around anywhere, you say Shakespeare, people know exactly who you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, and in fact, in the Old West, one of the reasons that we see this warrior culture and American independence is because the people who moved westward were still somewhat educated. They had a longing for the things they knew about, and it was a time of people considered themselves to be cultured. They might be a rough-looking cowboy, but he would, take a bath once a week, brush his mustache out, and put on a new bandana, and go down to the local saloon where other cowboys would be putting on a play. It was usually Shakespeare. They loved the idea of putting on a play by Shakespeare. And so we have several instances in history where this is recorded that they would put on these wonderful plays. Of course, they may not have ladies there, so they would have to have one kid, oh, I am Juliet, and they would get up there and they would do the whole in the same way that actually that William Shakespeare did. And it was so popular, but he also has Henry, he has the Henry series. He has all the stories of Lucretia and King Lear and the great warriors of Shakespeare's stories and the tales of betrayal and lust and power. This deeply influences the American psyche because of these plays, which were hundreds of years later, they're still being played out on the streets of a dusty little town in the middle of nowhere, because people wanted to know history. And for the most part, I would say that Shakespeare's greatest plays, some of them, yes, the comedies and things like that, but they are so deeply rooted in the history that he knew. And he's able to spread that throughout the ages. And it is a testament to not just to the craft that William Shakespeare did in writing these plays, but to the people who want to know more about history, people who tune in to Redoubt to hear him, loving what he does. I mean, it's so fascinating to me to watch and see who comes onto your show, Redoubt, when I'm looking at the chats, because I'll go up later and watch what you did, and we'll see the comments, and I see all of these views just to see train or to look at a battlefield. People still love it. They still want it. We need to give them.
That actually makes me think of something. So we've reached a point now with communicating information where we could communicate it so widespread and instantaneously like never before. We've reached a point now when we're trying to do, for years it's like, oh, I wish this historical event was made into a movie or a show. And I've kind of reached a point now where I'm like, nah, I don't want the movie. I don't want the show. I want to listen to this guy break it down to me. Perfect example. Fat Electrician is probably the most entertaining history channel out there right now. And he dots his X's and O's pretty darn well. So it's not just like he's making gibberish up. He does pretty darn good research going into making these videos. And the way he recites these events is the way you must hear about them. I'm like, no, this can't be a movie. This can't be this. I want to hear him describe these events. So we've reached that point now with using history to influence media, using it as a form of entertainment where it's like we've moved past these cinematic portrayals. It's kind of in some ways regressed to just having Homer going around and saying his poem to everybody and having everybody, listen to him for the night. It's kind of gone full circle to that.
We've entered the age of the storyteller, the person who actually tells the story in such a way that it is not only entertaining, but it has these little tidbits of information that you can't always get from a visual. And that's the thing.
True.
That only goes so far. But we talked about last week that we have show versus tell. Sometimes telling is the only way you're going to say the story, the thoughts inside someone's head, or the words that can't be spoken on a screen. The storyteller tells them. So we've seen this reemergence of the griot in the oral tradition, except it's on a screen. It's you can touch it. I can go up now and I can see storytellers that will be telling horror stories. What is it, Mr. Ballin? You have people that are telling true crime stories. You have people that are telling history stories. And Redoubt, when you get on there, you're actually telling stories. You go to that place, though, and you show me the picture. You show me a picture of what it really looks like. And you see the history of that one place where you could go and touch a stone that Stonewall Jackson may have stood by, or that someone else passed near it and fell to their death. And Gettysburg is such a heavy place for me. It's very...
I'll say because I've approached telling history slightly different ways. Some of my videos are basically vlogs. It's just me walking around and telling you, well, this happened over here, and this what's going on here. Sometimes I get a little more, I guess, I hate to use the word, get a little more, cinematic, try to be a little better with the visuals, so more narration and anything else, a tighter script. I'll probably say I think my best video where I kind of brought it all together, where I'm telling a complete story within a larger context of history. Man, doing that Irish Brigade video, Gettysburg, is something to me, only because I'm like, everybody knows the Irish Brigade. If you know little things on the Civil War, you know about this group of supposed Irish regiments that fight for the Union Army, and everybody remembers their charge at Fredericksburg, how they all get slaughtered, or basically left by horrible Union strategies, were left to die essentially. But I'm so fascinated by this story of what happened to them after that. I'm like, okay, once you imagine this is a brigade based on a culture and a group of people who are completely ostracized in large parts of the United States. The Union wants them over here to bolster the population, bolster the Industrial Revolution, but they don't want them to be in the same building with them at the same time. They don't believe in the same faith or anything. So they're forced to go out and fight. And then at this point, they've already gone through far more hell than the average Union soldier had gone through to this point. They lost... I think the brigade, oh God, what was its number initially? It was I'm trying to do the math in my head. It was about let's say it was about let's just put it this way. They lost 500 at Antietam, their first major battle.
Yeah.
They lose 1,300 at Fredericksburg. The whole brigade's been wiped out by the time you get to the 1863 campaign. And not a lot of people know about their action at Gettysburg. I'm like, isn't this ironic? One of the most famous units of the American Civil War, and nobody really talks about them being involved in the most famous battle of the Civil War. What did they do? And at that point, the poor guys the commander was just a colonel, and a colonel for the sake of it, a colonel commands a regiment. Regiments make brigades. So that just shows you how butchered the brigade is. You have a colonel commanding the whole brigade. The whole brigade had about 400-500 guys going into Gettysburg. That barely makes a regiment, and there's supposed to be a whole brigade on the battlefield. And then here they go again into another horrible event and walking in their footsteps. I'm just feeling all of that weight, that dread of what worse can happen to these guys? Oh, we're going into the wheat field at Gettysburg, the most heavily contested spot on the battlefield.
Yeah.
And they were only there for maybe 15-20 minutes in the actual fight, and of course suffer more heavy losses. It's another 200 casualties when it's over. It's that video in particular was great.
That's
and
intense.
Just trying to, I'm telling you a complete story essentially. I'm like, okay, here's this group of people that have already suffered more than we can imagine. Now imagine how are they going to go through July 2nd, 1863? And now remember, guys, this is one story that's happening simultaneously. Hundreds of thousands of stories are happening around us.
Yeah, that's history, man. It's stories upon stories all flowing at once. And with that said, actually, we're about to hit our mark at 4:30. Let's go ahead and wrap it up and give the closeouts. Redoubt, final thoughts, and where can people find you?
History does matter. History deserves to be preserved. And history, it says story in it. It is storytelling. It's just telling the stories of people before us, or the stories of what we endured in our daily lives. and it can be used to inspire it can be used to, you can just retell that history to the next generation so they can learn from the previous mistakes and previous successes, or you can use that to inspire you to make your own world. I'm always into watching people go build their own massive monolith worlds, like R.H. Snow and Black Knight have done very great at it, their own projects, taking history to really build that lore to make a believable world. And if you want to go and listen to me ramble some more, congratulations, you're a glutton for punishment. You can head over to Redoubt Productions. We live, explore, and preserve history one video at a time. I am a bit on a unintended hiatus at the moment, but the good news is big back catalog of all sorts of videos, including that Irish Brigade at Gettysburg video I just talked about, all over there. And keep an eye out on the Foo Bar Digital Lounge, because I'm going to try to resuscitate that for this year. Like I mentioned, a review on the anime Blue Gender should be coming out in the near future, and me and my friends got plans for more episodes in the near future for that podcast.
Excellent. Sounds like you're a very busy little duck over there in Pennsylvania.
Yeah.
R.H. Snow, you're up next.
Me.
Final thoughts, and where can people find you?
Is the lore of mankind. It is our story. It is all the little things that you love about fictional worlds and games and movies. Learn it about your own world. It's every bit as fascinating, every bit as wonderful. Start with you. Start with your family. Start with your mother and father. Anybody you can find some. If you don't have them, go to the old person down at the local corner store and ask them a question about what life was like when they were younger. Find out. Start building your own lore today. Make your world come alive with your history. It is important. They cannot take away from you what you know is true. And if you learn your history, you will preserve it not only for yourself, but for generations to come. And he who controls the history controls the destiny of the next generation. So make sure you learn it properly, you immerse yourself in it, and get good sources. Like Redoubt, for instance, over here, who is running his little thing and has trains on his videos, by the way. I love trains. I love trains. They're so fun.
There are a lot of train videos over there.
There are.
Surprisingly, trains and history go pretty well together.
They do. Mimi, I just love trains.
Yes, and armored trains too.
Yeah, I know. You need to go look at it. But yeah, so you can find me at watchforthedam.com, where I have my own alternate history story of a future Texas that's fighting for revolution from the government. And I will reference heavily the past histories of this future that may still be out there, as it has its own unique cyber kinetic world that it has to deal with. And we're still riding horses too, because it's Texas.
All right. You're in Texas, you need the horses. Black Knight, final thoughts, where can people find you?
Well, as you know, I did use quite a lot of real history, and I was focusing on the less known bits, and then some rather strange and sensational events, like that soldier that I mentioned, whose heart actually stopped the bullet. And I really love these oddities, as people used to call them. And so even legends, historical legends, which we all should remember that in the distant past, people kind of interpreted certain events in their own way. We shouldn't think them stupid. They just had a different way of perceiving things. So many of these legends I kind of used in my own way. Indeed, if you are writing, especially something involved, a story or a screenplay or a book, that involves a bit of an alternate history, you would do good, even if it's not alternate history, even if it's uh, just fictional universe of yours. You would do well, like to grab some interesting historical bits. As to where people can find me, you can find me my books on Amazon. All of my seven out of 10 books from the Star Shattered
Nice.
series, and my 2 anthologies, which are also short stories from the same universe. The Mandate of Sword and Railgun is the first one, and The Blood of Tyrants is the second one. Also, my 2 Conan-esque books, also in the same universe, about Vaylin Doltorian. And finally, my newest pure 100% pure fantasy book, Lord Bones. And of course, if you like the stories, the newest stories, and some poetry, some amateurish poetry, you can go to the Black Knight Substack.com and read everything there.
Excellent. And I am James Esparza, talking living sandwich over here. I am a short story writer. Somehow I manage that as well. And you can find all my short stories. I'll be releasing 2 the exact same day next month. I release them at the end of the month. If you're a subscriber, you get them in the middle of the month on the 15th. You can find all that at worldwithoutendlore.substack.com. But with that, everybody, enjoy the rest of your day. We are out of here. Bye-bye now. Arrivederci.
Bye.